much, and good morning. Well, good morning from the UK. Excuse me. I was just explaining to the rest of the panel that it's an incredibly warm morning here in the UK, which is very unusual, and we're all very excited. So I feel like I'm channeling the Australian weather. And yeah, it's so great to be here. As that great intro said, I'm Phil. I am a kind of a weird hybrid beast in that I am partly an academic, so I'm an affiliated scholar at the University of Cambridge, but I'm also an EdTech enthusiast, let's say. So I've been researching now for 20 odd years or so, because I'm very old, but I've been researching first and foremost how humans learn. So what are the optimal conditions in which we can gain new knowledge and develop new skills and just feel fulfilled and happy and well as human beings? And partly just by coincidence, because when I was doing that back in the early 2000s, technology was on the rise, education technology. I got super interested in thinking about, okay, if we understand what the optimal conditions for human learning are, can we use technology to help us to create those conditions and basically to scale the sorts of really high impact learning experiences that at the moment only a tiny proportion of people get. So that's really that's the backstory. And as you can imagine, over the last 6 months now, believe it or not, it feels like it's been both forever and no time at all. But over the last 6 months, while we've all been responding to the rise of ChatGPT since around about December last year, as you can imagine, this has become really the focus of my research. And so what I'd like to do today is really just to zoom out a little bit, first of all, and to give you really the story so far of how the world of education has responded to the rise of AI. I know that there has been a lot of talk about this. I know there's been a lot of fear, a lot of curiosity, also, I think a lot of confusion. So my goal today is to try and cut through some of that noise, to give you a summary of the story so far, to give you a sense of where we are right now. And also, I'm just going to give you some, I hope anyway, really practical examples for how some people are already experimenting with the use of AI in the classroom, specifically in the English language classroom, so that you can perhaps take those away and start to experiment yourself and get a sense of where you're falling on this, this kind of scale of I don't know, ban it terror versus love it, embracing. Most of us fall in between the two, but yeah, hopefully I can help you identify where you sit. To start, I would like to rewind to, as I say, end of 2022. So this is when OpenAI first released the beast that is ChatGPT. I should say, maybe you already know, but I should say that at this point in time, AI, generative AI, was not new. We've actually had AI in education now for over 60 years. What is new, what changed at the end of last year, is that we all got access to it. It became, what OpenAI did was give us a really great and simple interface, which means that we no longer have to be coders in order to play with AI. So I think it's important to acknowledge that this is not necessarily new, and there's actually quite a lot that we can learn about how AI has already been used in education. But yeah, as I say, what was new is our access to it and the way that we can interact with AI as just as humans, but specifically today as educators. And I think the initial reaction at the end of 2022 was fear and was repression. So the use of, I guess, like, if AI can generate impressive responses to essays and questions and other forms of written assignments, which we realized very quickly that it could do very well, the question is, like, shoot, how on earth do we stop our students from using this, like, to cheat the system? And of course, like, this is understandable. Like, the system was almost immediately broken. This has never happened before. And so for some schools, the reaction was to return to in-the-room examinations. So we saw in Australian universities, for example, they returned to pen and paper exams. We tried to get everybody back in the room, and we tried to assess them by watching them and making sure it was them and not a robot that was responding in the exam. In other institutions, we saw the rise of technologies that you might be familiar with. So things like GPT-0 and Turnitin AI. And these are so-called ChatGPT detection technologies. And what these do, as the name suggests, is they claim, and this is a whole presentation in itself, they claim to be able to detect text that is generated by AI versus text that's generated by a human. So it's very much like a plagiarism check that's ironically conducted by AI, and another kind of safety net to make sure that our students are not cheating. But two problems very quickly emerged. The first is that in-room assessment just isn't practical. And we saw within 1 month, many U-turns on this. We can't scale this as a method of assessment. It just didn't work. And the other thing that we found out that's super interesting, I think, is that AI detection technologies are, let's say, flawed in different ways. Actually, as you know, as quickly as the world was developing these detection technologies, we had hackers and then very soon entrepreneurs building products that basically sought to make these detection technologies break. So, for example, if you want to look into this, there's now a very successful startup called Conch, and its mission is to enable any student to use ChatGPT and go undetected by detection technology. So what we've ended up with is this very strange, quite entertaining but bizarre cat and mouse game where like as quickly as we are kind of building GPT detection tools, we're building tools that can beat them. And what we've realized then is, and I think where we are right now is we've realized that framing ChatGPT as cheating, the use of ChatGPT as cheating is it's a little bit of a waste of time and energy. Some institutions are absolutely committing to this and are finding ways to beat the hackers, but many institutions now more than ever are asking the question instead, well, if instead of framing the use of AI as misconduct, what if instead we embraced it in the classroom? What would that look like? And so I think where we are right now is, I mean, I should say the cat and mouse game does continue. So as I say, there's some institutions who are continuing to invest in GPT-0, Turnitin, who are committing still to in-room exams. So that's one potential route for this kind of new post-AI world. But as I say, in the last, I would say in the last couple of months or so, more and more educators are exploring if and how they might actually embrace AI in the classroom. And specifically what we're seeing is three big questions emerging. So how, as educators, can we use AI to improve our efficiency? There are a lot of repetitive tasks that we do. So can we use AI to streamline our workflows is the first question. The second question that's being asked is, can we and should we use AI in the classroom to improve our students' AI literacy? There are many people around, and I am, included in this, who, because of the fact that AI is going to, I think, inevitably be part of all of our futures, that we as educators have a responsibility to ensure that our students are critical and informed creators and consumers of AI. And so this question is being raised more and more. Is this our responsibility as educators? And if so, how do we improve our students' AI literacy in the classroom? And then finally, and this is where I'm super interested, we're also starting to ask, actually, if we use AI, can we actually improve the teaching and learning process? Can we actually use AI to deliver better learning outcomes? And to put that super simply, what we're seeing is that there are some potential use cases where we see AI doing two things. One, improving student motivation. This intrinsic motivation to learn is so important. And the second is we're seeing AI as a really powerful tool in some cases for improving mastery. So these two big M's, motivation and mastery of outcomes. We're seeing the achievement not just of these lower order objectives like recall and regurgitation, but higher end things like analysis and evaluation, critical thinking, that kind of thing. And I'll say more about this in a bit. I think I said just now that I think AI is inevitably going to be part of our students' lives and work for the foreseeable. The reason that that is my hypothesis is research like this. So what we're beginning to now see, because we've had time to conduct tests, are controlled studies emerging. And what those controlled studies have shown is that ChatGPT alone, which we should keep in mind is just the tip of the AI iceberg, but ChatGPT alone, it has able to increase human productivity by around 35%. This is huge. To put it into context, I'm a historian. I like my historical analogies. During the Industrial Revolution, the introduction of steam, which kind of changed a lot of things very fundamentally, very quickly, it increased human productivity by around about 25%. So this is massive. And I think this fact alone will mean that AI will stick around as long as it remains open access and free to use, or relatively free to use and easy to use in the way that it already is. I do not foresee a future where we don't bake in these efficiency gains that the AI offer us. And therefore, it's really important, in my view, for us to support our students to, as I said earlier, be really constructive and critical consumers, creators of AI. So I've been running some really practical, very quick research on how our educators using AI right now in this phase that we've entered into, where there is more curiosity than there is fear. What are educators doing? And what I'm finding is that first and foremost, they're taking advantage of these efficiency gains that AI offers us. You probably recognize some of these tools already, but essentially, most educators are using AI as a productivity tool, as a way of streamlining administrative, repetitive tasks so that they can spend their time on more valuable things. And maybe that's one big thing to take away today, is that AI needs you. I often get asked, like, is AI going to replace teachers? What I see every single day suggests absolutely not. What AI will do is enable us as educators to, as I say, streamline, automate an amount of the stuff that distracts us from the work that we really do, which is getting to know our students, supporting them, using our understanding of teaching and learning science, to make sure that all students have the same sorts of opportunities to reach outcomes and just have a long and happy life. So that's a side note here. And here we have some examples of how this is happening already. So you probably know these, but tools like Grammarly and Quillbot enable us to generate learning objectives and exercises from just very quick prompts, or just very, very basic information we can enter, and it can help us to generate those things really quickly. Again, AI needs you. The quality of the prompt absolutely impacts the quality of the output. So if you were just to enter very generically, for example, in ChatGPT, write me a lesson plan, the results are not great. The results are a ton of content and then a quiz at the end, typically. A knowledge check in person or a knowledge check online. That is not like pedagogically sound, but with your expertise, with you as this kind of expert prompt engineer who can add some parameters and, for example, say, well, the objectives must be measurable, the objectives must increase in complexity over time. By inputting your expertise as a teacher, the output that you get from these things is significantly better. And so again, key takeaway, AI needs you. The quality of the input dictates the quality of the output. There's also some, there's like quiz generation tools. Again, you can just type in, you can just give it some content and it will generate a quiz. There's also, of course, a large number and a growing number, I should say, of AI-powered grading and feedback tools like Gradescope and Marker, and I think Turnitin also have an AI-powered grading tool. And I think these tools, these grading tools, are particularly powerful if they enable us to deliver more feedback. One thing that the learning science research shows really clearly is that feedback is one of the most powerful levers that we have to drive learner motivation and learner mastery of outcomes. So, and of course it matters what the quality of that feedback is, but that's where your expertise comes in. But if we can use AI to replicate ourselves, to enable students to get more feedback and more personalized feedback over the course of the learning experience. If you were to do one thing, probably I would use AI to do that, because that's the most powerful lever that we have to drive student outcomes. So some of these tools are about efficiency. Some of them are really, really about pedagogical effectiveness. And I think feedback is a place to focus there. I've also put on Tome here. There are various other tools. There's one called Gamma, Slides AI. These are just tools which enable us to very quickly turn text into presentations to give to our students. There's also loads of AI tools out there that you'll have seen where we can turn text into video, text into images, these kind of things. So there's a lot of tools that are being built to improve our efficiency, to streamline our workflows. And I think first and foremost, this is how AI is being used in education, and this is not new. So if you think about the education technologies that we've had before, I always think of like the interactive whiteboard, for example. It didn't change what we do, but perhaps it made it like a little bit quicker. Perhaps it made it a little bit easier. Perhaps it didn't, but it didn't change our practice. So we have these productivity tools, and that's great, but they're great, I think, because they give us more time to focus on like more important things. And so like one key takeaway then is that AI can definitely increase our efficiency, great. But we can, and this is what my research is starting to show, we can also use AI to achieve those other goals that we identified earlier. So we can also use AI to increase our students' AI literacy and to deliver better outcomes. So I just want to say a little bit now about what that looks like, what people are already doing here. And the new kind of classroom model that's emerging, I've started to refer to it as flipped learning 4.0, because, you know, it's not a post-AI thing if we don't say 4.0. And of course, the flipped learning model you will be familiar with already, I'm sure. It's well established. Essentially, when our students are working on their own, so that might be at home before a class, or working independently at the beginning of a class with you. Their job is to get to know, like to work independently, to get to know a concept, a process, a theory, a thesis, whatever it is, through personalized exploration. And then, like in this, the magic of the connected classroom, we collectively work together. So we do things like we challenge our students to discuss what they learned or what they read. We teach them to make arguments and practice and present back what they've learned, to be challenged and to challenge others and to work together to come to conclusions. And in this scenario, the teacher can ask questions, groups of students can ask each other questions. And what we see is that this flipped model leads to improved memorization of concepts, deeper understanding, but also the development of really critical skills like communication, critical thinking, evidence-based arguments, and this kind of thing. And then in the flipped learning classroom, of course, once the class is over, if we want, we can assign our students some other stuff to do to help to reinforce what has been learned over stages 1 and 2. And traditionally, of course, this model has been powered by different sorts of resources, so by books and journals. So, you know, the independent study is read this thing and then think about this question, for example. More recently, we've started to integrate things like online tools, so things like Khan Academy. Khan Academy is actually designed to fulfill this model by giving students activities that they do before and after class. We also use YouTube, all sorts of other tools, of course. And of course, in a post-AI world, ChatGPT is increasingly being used as part of this toolkit, as part of this flipped learning model, and with some really interesting results. So what does it look like in practice? Well, what I've done is I have put together some examples of what a flipped 4.0 classroom might look like from the perspective of an English language teacher. And these are based on some real examples that I've seen out in the world. Predominantly, I should say, over in the US and in Australia, where there is a lot of experimentation happening, certainly more so than in Europe, although there are pockets of innovation there too. So to return to the flipped model, in stage 1, we have this period of like independent study. So what we might do here is we might assign, so we're going to assign specific objectives to the students. And in our case, this might be something around like objectives on English grammar, vocab, language skills. Using ChatGPT, as you can see, there's all sorts of interesting things that we can have students do before we get together to learn. So they can engage in conversation practice, they can test their grammar, their vocab. And research shows that one of the best, also one of the most challenging ways to learn a topic is to teach it. And so another really powerful way of using ChatGPT is to position it, as you can see here, as like a student tells ChatGPT that it is going to teach it whatever it is. So that might be, I don't know how to use past participles. I'm not an English language teacher, so forgive my ignorance. And so what we see here effectively is like some really rich, interactive, active, responsive activities that students can do before and after the class to really extend time on task, but also, and really importantly, introduce a learning experience that's much more personalized. It's much more active, which we know leads to greater motivation and mastery. And also they're getting that really valuable feedback. One of the beautiful things about ChatGPT is that every time you do something, you get some feedback, you get a response. And what we're finding is that actually that feedback is of a really good quality when the context is constrained. So here, for example, knowing by giving ChatGPT a specific role, so you'll notice that I've said here, you are an English language expert, or I am a teacher of English. By giving it context and constraining its focus, the quality of the interactions that students can have with ChatGPT goes up significantly. So that's the independent study part. And then once the students have kind of done their preliminary work, they have used AI and maybe also other sources to do their kind of prep. We then get to the exciting teacher-learner interaction bit. And lots of different things are happening in classrooms. There is, of course, discussion. So students come back, they share what they've learned. So, for example, they might describe the grammar rules that they've studied or like how to use vocabulary in a certain context. And what we do then as teachers is to facilitate these discussions, to correct any misunderstandings and to direct learning. But in the post-AI classroom, it's also really important, and this is true for all of these things, that we also have conversations about the reliability of AI. And what we're finding is that students are coming back from their independent study and getting different results from AI. And then we can have really interesting and rich conversations about, well, why is that happening? Which version is more reliable? Which version is better? How do we know which version is correct? How are we going to validate this? And so what we end up with is a really rich classroom environment in which we are, of course, teaching our learning objectives, but also enabling our students to become literate in AI, to understand that it's built by humans and that as such it is flawed like humans, that it hallucinates, which is the polite way of saying that it makes stuff up, and that its outputs depend on what is inputted. And so we're kind of then operating and teaching on two levels, where we're teaching them about English language in a way that's really dynamic, I should say, like really like hands-on, practical, loads of feedback, like in a way that essentially the learning science tells us we'll get to a better result than a kind of stage on the stage approach. But we're also teaching them about AI. And so this is happening frequently in those classrooms where educators are experimenting with AI. This is the most dominant model that I'm seeing. And again, post-class, we return to these sorts of exercises that students are able to do independently. Sometimes they also choose to go and do them in groups. But again, we can better achieve our objectives because they now have this brilliant tool where they can continue their conversation practice, grammar, teaching others, vocab, or whatever it is. This, of course, requires both us and our students to understand AI. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges for us as educators is like, how do we become expert in this? Like, if we're going to be these people who ensure that our students can use AI, suddenly we have to be domain experts. We have to be brilliant, teachers, mentors, coaches, and AI experts. And so yeah, I think this for us is like, it should be our number one priority, is getting to grips with AI. And perhaps we'll talk about this in the Q&A, but really trying to understand just enough to make sure that we can use it really proficiently in our lessons like this, if we want to. So in summary, like, the flipped learning approach allows us basically to teach our students how to use AI, but also to deliver a much more dynamic learning experience than one that, for example, is, and my research shows that 90% of learning experiences are like this, where the teacher stands at the front and presents information, and then the students sort of show they can regurgitate it. In this kind of post-AI flipped 4.0 model, the experience is much more dynamic, and it integrates the use of AI. But what does all of this mean for assessment? And this is probably like one of the questions that I get asked most. So in a world where tools like ChatGPT can generate these very high quality answers, essays, short answers, whatever, how do we assess our students' learning? In this flip 4.0 scenario, what on earth does assessment look like? And broadly speaking, and I think this is less of a dramatic shift for English language teachers, who I know already do quite an analysis of skills, pronunciation skills, communication skills, this kind of thing. But generally speaking, what we're seeing is a shift from the assessment of knowledge and basic skills to the assessment of knowledge, complex skills like behavior change and process. So let's just take a couple of minutes to just dive into that in a little bit more detail. So like, I think I have a slide on this, sorry. Yeah, so I think basically, yeah, I haven't. So I'm just going to spin you through this in theory. So what does this process look like in practice? Maybe make some notes. What I'm seeing is 4 types of assessment emerge. The first is the assessment of students' ability to research, evaluate, and analyze. So in that independent study part of the learning process, we can start to assess our students on how well they find the right sources, how well they judge the validity of AI, how well they critically engage with it in the process of learning. And so this kind of shift to the assessment of behavior and process is something that we're seeing more and more. So there's that. We also are assessing skills much more. We're seeing this more and more across all sorts of different subjects. So rather than just like rote memorization of vocabulary or grammar rules, students, for example, might be assessed on their ability to apply these rules in more authentic real world context. So this could involve like listening comprehension or oral communication or things like this. But the focus would be on the process of learning language effectively rather than just knowing about it. And then the other thing that we're seeing, so what we're talking about here really is like process-based assessment and performance-based assessment. We're seeing a shift from do you know this stuff to do you know this stuff, but also can you do these things? And I think AI is giving us more and more opportunities to be able to do that in the classroom. I think it's something that we've always promised that we'll do, that we'll deliver skills as well as knowledge. But in this kind of knowledge transfer model where we just ask them to regurgitate, so the thing that ChatGPT can now do, we just haven't achieved that. So in conclusion, and where like to go back to where we started, many people over the last few months have complained about the dangers, the unreliability of AI tools like ChatGPT, and they've argued that we should consider banning it from education and doing things like returning to pen and paper exams. Some institutions are continuing to invest in these technologies and to ban AI from the classroom. But also increasingly, especially over the last 2 months, we're seeing this rise of this more positive attitude towards AI, which positions it less as a threat and more as a tool to enable our students to develop AI literacy and to enable us as educators to be more efficient so that we have more time to dedicate to the things that matter most. So in summary, I would say like what we're seeing so far on the positive side of things, like the effect of AI so far is that we're seeing an increase in students' AI literacy. We're seeing AI leading to much more active learning. So we're shifting from this, I sit and listen to you and then I speak it back, to I participate in a process of exploration and co-creation of our knowledge. We're also seeing much more like the scaling of personalized learning without needing to invest in really expensive technologies. So of course, ChatGPT conversations are deeply personalized, as is the feedback that ChatGPT gives. We're seeing students getting more feedback, which means they get better outcomes. And we're also just seeing increased teacher presence, so less time and energy spent on admin and more time and energy spent on, I guess, a presence that's more like a sage, like more than a sage on the stage, is like a coach or a, what is it, like a guide on the side, like facilitating these really rich conversations and these processes that we're seeing increasingly happen in the classroom. And the two big things, maybe the most important thing, is that what we're seeing is that these things are leading to two things: improved learner motivation. So kids just love this, and adults, I should say, I work mostly with adults, but students are much more motivated. They are excited to use AI and they are motivated because the learning experience involves them more. They're participating in it. And we're also seeing, as a result of that, improved learning outcomes. So by applying this more personalized and active learning experience, we are seeing improvements in the things that matter. So things like retention, achievement, student satisfaction. And for me, what's super exciting is the fact that those outcomes are even more significant for students from so-called non-traditional backgrounds. I don't like that phrase, but I haven't got a better one. So this AI effect is greater for those students who are from social and economic backgrounds, which means that they are less likely to succeed in education than other students. So for me, AI, it's complicated, it's changing every day. And so who knows where this is going? But for me, I see a lot, like if we use AI in the right way, I see this as a positive both for us as teachers and for our students' outcomes. So yeah, that's where I am at. That's what I've been doing for the last 6 months. And I would love to hear your thoughts and try to answer any questions that you have. And yeah, just get your reflections on where you are on this kind of scale of the fearful over to the excited.
Thank you, Philippa. I think that was so useful and so relevant to what we are currently doing as language teachers. There are some questions coming through, and just to encourage everyone to please put your questions in the Q&A section so that we can bring them to Philippa now. I'll start with the first question, Philippa. It is from Magdalena. She says, using AI for independent study is amazing. Could you give us a specific example of how you have scaffolded the prompts students would use? Do you get students to screenshot their conversations and submit it to you?
Yes, it's a great question. And so it kind of depends who the students are. Certainly at the beginning, when you're first introducing AI, two things actually I did. One is I wrote an AI manifesto, which is in one of my blog posts, and you're very, very welcome to steal if it's helpful. But it helps to set the scene. And essentially it says that never trust, always assume AI is wrong until you prove otherwise. So we have a frame, like I would recommend setting out a framework to make it really clear how to use AI at a very high level. So just setting out that it's not always correct, that it hallucinates, that prompting matters. And at the beginning, absolutely, I would scaffold this also by giving very clear instructions, so very clear signaling on these are the prompts that you should use. This is why the structure of the prompts matter. So I mentioned, for example, like, I don't know, giving ChatGPT a role and then a specific task, and then asking if it understands, gets better results. So absolutely, and particularly at the beginning, as you're transitioning into this, be super clear on exactly the prompts that students should use, but start to teach them like why the prompts are that way. And then what we find is that we can reduce some of that scaffolding and let them ask their own questions. And then the conversation becomes even more interesting, because it's like, oh, well, I went about this by asking this question and I went down this route. rabbit hole, whereas but it's definitely like any scaffolding at the beginning and then take it away as we see them like getting more confident, I suppose.
Yeah, it's interesting. We in English language teaching, we teach turn taking. So it's that sort of specific communicative skills where you need to sort of ask the question to get a specific result. And I feel like we're starting to see this idea of sort of chat GPT turn taking coming through, and almost these the prompt literacy as something we'll need to explicitly be working on in class. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So the next question comes from Becky. Becky says, how severe do you think the digital divide in AI literacy will become if AI is banned and students then have to work at another institution where it has been embraced and are therefore more digitally literate?
This is another brilliant question, a fascinating thing. I've actually been doing some work with the UN on this to try to measure, like, what does this mean for the digital divide? And it's a great point. Already, what we're seeing in the UK, I'm not sure what the situation is in Australia, but certainly in the UK, and I think also in America, we're already seeing the deepening of the digital divide. What we're seeing is that here, independent schools, so schools that are paid for, are investing in consultancy from people like me and people I work with. Well, not me, because I've opted out, but that's an aside. To integrate AI, to get the training that the teachers need. They also have the equipment that the students need to be able to try these tools that are paid for. And what we're seeing then is that the students coming out of independent schools are going to be much more confident and competent in AI than those in the comprehensive system, where for lots of reasons that are financial, but also just I think institutional, like change is harder to operate, to instigate on that huge level. We're also seeing a divide between K-12 and higher ed. So higher ed, again, has much more, I think, resource and freedom to, in pockets at least, experiment and have an amount of independence. Whereas in K-12, again, we're still kind of waiting for government initiatives. We're waiting to be told, like, what's okay, what isn't. Yeah. And so it's a great question. I think there's also a much more positive scenario in which we reduce the digital divide through the use of AI, because I think unlike other education technologies, like, it doesn't require a huge amount of hardware and huge infrastructure in terms of like bandwidth and this kind of thing. And so already I can see a scenario in which people who at the moment can't access great education because they don't have those things, they can use ChatGPT relatively easily on a 3G connection on a basic phone. So it's interesting, but it is, I think, concerning that so far that there is a very noticeable difference in the reaction, or the speed of the response, I guess, in independent versus non-independent schools.
Yeah, and I think that is reflected here in Australia as well, definitely. Thank you. I think we'll just take one more question. One that's kind of a burning question a few people have asked is, and then I'll hand over to you, Kelly. Will AI help teachers or replace them?
Yes, I mean, a great question. One I get asked all the time. Well, I like to reassure people by saying that this isn't new. So, for example, in Georgia Tech University in America, they have had Jill Watson, who's an AI teaching assistant for many, many years. Jill Watson has not replaced the teachers. What she has done is automate an amount of the stuff that is repetitive, that is the administrative stuff that we just don't want to do. And I think this is the scenario that we're going to see. The same has happened in medicine, where they're a little bit ahead of education. What we're seeing is that AI is not replacing experts, but it's just freeing them up to become more expert. And so I think the role of the flipped classroom 4.0 is a good example of how the role of the teacher, I think, is going to become very different. I think it's going to shift from, I have all of this domain expertise, to I am a brilliant coach. I can facilitate these conversations. I can assess not just knowledge gain, but also behavior, process. I am also expert in AI, maybe also in data analysis, because there's going to be a lot of data that's being produced if we use AI in the classroom. So I think the role will change, but I don't think, and I think this is going to be applied broadly, like the AI is going to replace humans. I mean, on a very basic level, I don't think we would let it. But also, AI is nothing without human input. The quality of the output depends on that input.
Thank you so much. I feel like we could chat about this all day, but we must move on. And I know, Philippa, that you've got a train to catch. So thank you so much for your session today. And we will be sharing the details with everyone to how to be in contact with you and how to follow you on the socials. And we very much appreciate your session.
No, that's great. Yeah, so you can follow me on LinkedIn. Also, I'm very happy to take these questions afterwards and somehow continue to chat with people so we can talk about that as well. But thanks so much for your time, and I hope that was helpful.